Invite viewers to post their location and local time. He takes a sip from his chipped blue mug, the one with faded numbers from an old tax season giveaway when the sound jolts him upright. Boots not just one pair but many slamming pavement with a rhythm that doesn't belong in Maple Ridge Estates. At first he thinks maybe a running club is testing out pre-dawn cardio, but then the megaphone blares. This is the police. Exit your residence immediately with your hands visible. His fork hovers over a plate of scrambled eggs that suddenly looks like a condemned last meal. Through his window, he sees rifles, scopes reflecting the pink edge of sunrise, and armored men surrounding his vegetable garden like it's Fort Knox. The absurdity almost makes him laugh almost. The petunias he planted yesterday flap under the weight of laser sights, and he wonders if any officer is tempted to frisk the zucchini patch. Historians still argue whether comedy is born in tragedy or simply in misapplied seriousness, and this moment seems like Exhibit A. He steps outside in Slipper's bathrobe, barely tied, hands raised like he's starring in some parody of a cop show. "I'm David Morrison," he says, voice steadier than his knees. The lead officer narrows his eyes, clearly expecting a militia leader, not a retiree who still reads the newspaper the old-fashioned way. They mention reports of a fortified compound. David laughs out loud, then apologizes because laughing at men with rifles isn't recommended in any survival handbook. It turns out Karen Peaton, the self-appointed queen bee of the HOA, had called 911 with claims he was constructing underground bunkers, hiding weapons, and preparing for armed resistance. She even told dispatch in words the officer repeats with visible discomfort, "Shoot if they resist." A retired accountant digging irrigation trenches had somehow become a threat to national security in her imagination. To prove otherwise, he invites them inside. They pass family photos, worn recliners, and a bookshelf filled with tax guides no human has read twice. Out back they find his true arsenal PVC, piping a compost tumbler and tomato stakes, leaning like bored sentinels. No weapons, no bunkers, just cucumbers twisting under chicken wire. The sergeant looks unimpressed not with David, but with the waste of taxpayer resources. One officer mutters that even medieval castles had less fuss over irrigation. As David signs a consent to search form, he's already thinking of Karen's binoculars glinting from her upstairs window, the way she has always watched him, as if waiting to pounce. He doesn't yet know this morning will become the turning point, the moment neighbors will whisper about for years at block parties. Right now, he just knows he's in his robe with 10 officers trampling his petunias, and somewhere Karen is smiling like she orchestrated a Broadway opening night. The SWAT team rolls away, leaving tire tracks through his driveway dust, and David stands blinking at the wreckage of his once quiet morning. He thinks of how it began with something small, Karen's measuring tape dangling like a sheriff's badge as she patrolled lawns. She fined him for a mailbox tilted 2 degrees for a wet leaf that masqueraded as an oil stain for grass that dared to grow a whisper too high. At first he treated it like a sitcom gag. "Who knew spreadsheets prepared me for tyranny?" he'd joke. But Karen wasn't laughing. She turned obsession into policy clipboard, into weapon rumor, into artillery. The garden was her tipping point. Tomatoes staked neatly in rows became enemy fortifications in her eyes. When David rented a trencher to bury irrigation pipes, she leaned from her window with binoculars for birdwatching. She insisted, scribbling notes like a Cold War spy. He showed her receipts, system diagrams, even a hand-drawn map with happy carrots smiling in marker. But she was already crafting a darker script. She called inspector, city, county, even state. One by one they came, shrugged, and left. Each clearance only seemed to inflame her more. Then came the flashlight nights. His motion-activated cameras, installed on the advice of a deputy, caught her prowling through his yard at 11:30, then again at 2 a.m., measuring tomato stakes like she was drafting blueprints for a siege. Sometimes she even brought a clipboard and muttered to herself the way scholars still argue whether medieval witches were paranoid or simply misunderstood. Watching Karen's late-night rituals, David leaned toward the former. The footage became his lifeline. Each trespass saved to the cloud, each alert pinging his phone while he bought milk or sat reading mystery novels. He started narrating his life in mock documentary voice. Here we see the elusive HOA president in her natural habitat hunting the invasive tomato. Humor was his defense, but anxiety tugged at him. What would she do next? Rumors began to ripple, neighbors whispering he was a sovereign citizen, a bunker builder, a man who might refuse to pay taxes with vegetables. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, others crossed the street. Isolation crept in like fog. It was almost comic, except for the dread. One night, after replaying her 2 a.m. footage, he whispered to himself, "She won't stop until something breaks." And he was right. The call to 911, her frantic claim of an armed compound, her chilling words, "If they resist, shoot," was her final escalation. By then, the SWAT team knew the truth, and the sergeant had already suggested charges. But David wasn't done. He dug deeper through camera archives, through the HOA bylaws she twisted like origami, through the pattern of forged violation notices that neighbors began sharing after the SWAT debacle. The neighborhood mood shifted. Even Harold the treasurer, usually as firm as overcooked spaghetti, began muttering about financial irregularities. Susan, the secretary, admitted Karen backdated fines. And Tom, the vice president, finally seemed embarrassed at nodding along to her bunker theories. Like a magician caught palming coins, Karen's tricks were unraveling. The evidence David held, the trench videos, the trespasses, the late-night whispers to her clipboard, was about to meet its moment under brighter lights than her upstairs window. The HOA meeting is held at the community center, and word spreads faster than free Wi-Fi. By the time David arrives with a small speaker tucked under his arm, the room is standing room only. Folding chairs scrape, voices hum, and the air feels charged like a storm waiting to break. Karen sweeps in late, draped in designer workout clothes that have never known sweat, clutching her clipboard like a queen's scepter. She tries to call the meeting to order, but Tom Bradley, the once spineless vice president, rises first. His voice trembles at the start, but each word gains weight as he declares she's no longer running the show. She argues, of course, insisting she protected them from a dangerous man. That's when David steps forward, thumb-tapping his phone. The room hushes as Karen's voice fills the space, shrill, certain, unmistakable. "If they resist, shoot." The words hang heavy like lead weights dropped into clear water. Someone gasps, another whispers, "My God." Even Harold, who had once treated her like a general, sinks into his chair. Karen's face cycles from crimson to paper white, claiming the audio is doctored, context twisted, but the damage is done. The vote is swift, unanimous, save for Karen herself, who mutters nay with a trembling hand. Stripped of her crown, she storms out, but the consequences follow. The district attorney files charges, false police report, reckless endangerment. Weeks later, neighbors peek from curtains as squad cars pull into her driveway. She shrieks about rights and conspiracies, but the irony is rich. After telling police to shoot an innocent man, she's the one in cuffs. In court, David watches her clutch her designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles bleach. When the judge orders restitution for the $15,000 SWAT deployment, she lets out a strangled half-gasp, half-screech, knees buckling until her lawyer steadies her. Her sentence, probation, 200 hours of community service, fines, hits harder than any gavel strike. Insurance refuses to cover her legal bills, and within months, a for sale sign appears in her yard. She vanishes to another state, a disgraced queen without her kingdom. David, meanwhile, finds unexpected allies. Neighbors once wary now knock on his door with pies, casseroles, and stories of their own harassment. The HOA, under new leadership, reimburses his bogus fines and enacts reforms, recorded meetings, limited board power, financial transparency. His garden thrives, cucumbers curling fat under morning dew, tomatoes bright as lanterns. A neighbor gifts him a sign reading, "Warning, dangerous tomatoes, HOA approved." He plants it proudly by the compost bin. The SWAT raid becomes neighborhood lore retold at barbecues with laughter and shivers. Kids play near his fence and whisper about the morning soldiers mistook zucchini for weapons. And every time David leans back in his chair, sipping coffee from that faded tax season mug, he knows absurdity can turn deadly, but with patience proof and just a touch of humor, even dictators in designer sweats can crumble. The heat of it all cools with time, as heat always does. The meetings grow calmer, the neighborhood less tense, and the mornings stretch again into slow coffee sips rather than tactical boot echoes. The grass grows sometimes too high, sometimes uneven, but nobody measures it anymore. Nobody clicks a pen against a clipboard as if preparing charges for crimes of nature. The bylaws that once weighed heavy like a net of thorns now rest lighter, trimmed down, reshaped by the voices of ordinary neighbors who finally remembered that community is supposed to mean care, not control. David's garden hums through the seasons. The cucumbers swell, the tomatoes redden, and the sound of sprinklers ticking across rows replaces the old silence of suspicion. At dusk, he leans against the porch rail, listening to crickets weave their constant hymn, and he feels a quiet victory, not loud, not celebrated in headlines, but steady in its presence. Historians still argue whether power always corrupts, but in his backyard the evidence feels more like this power misused eventually burns itself out, leaving only soil ready for something new to grow. The neighbors gather sometimes, bringing folding chairs and lemonade, watching kids dart between rows of beans. They laugh about the compound, about the infamous tomatoes, about how close they all came to forgetting who they were supposed to be to each other. And in that laughter, healing takes root. So tonight, if you carry your own battles, your own Karens with clipboards or shadows with louder voices than reason, take this as a gentle reminder. Patience and truth have longer legs than rumor and rage. The storm may circle, but it cannot stay. Rest easy. Breathe deeper, and let the quiet settle like dew across your own small garden.